Hello, I'm Philip Rice. Now, our Rector Hannah kicked off our Lent series last week on Ash Wednesday. Good day to start. And if you're watching this on the correct day, Wednesday the 24th, then this evening is the next instalment of the Lent course, which is based on the book Wild Hope by Gail Boss. And I encourage you to join in if you possibly can, using the link in Hannah's email. The theme this week is the hungry. Now, of course, Lent is a time that many people associate with depriving oneself, and in particular depriving oneself of chocolate or other food treats, or actually taking the opportunity to cut down on food in order to get our bodies into better shape. Yes, well, moving swiftly on. In other words, it's a time when many people might find themselves, from time to time, having deprived themselves, they might just feel a bit peckish. Actually, today is my birthday. Well, not today as I sit here recording this, but today when you're watching it, assuming you're watching it on the right day, Wednesday the 24th. If you're watching it on catch up, then one of those belated cards and an apology will do fine. But the point is that my birthday falls during Lent, as it always does every year. And as far as I can remember, I've never actually felt deprived or hungry on my birthday. Those of you who remember my 70th birthday party might recall that there was lots of food. My wife and sisters and wider family provided masses of food for everyone, and as a consequence of that, actually it felt a bit like the feeding of the 5,000, because 12 basketfuls of food gathered up at the end of the party. We were eating leftovers for days. Actually, Caroline thought she'd given me food poisoning as a result of feeding me with leftovers. As it turned out, it was appendicitis. But that's another story. I suppose I have felt hungry from time to time, but when it happens, I just go and get something to eat. I'm one of the lucky ones. Even when I was unemployed for 2 years with 2 young babies at home, we always had food on the table. That's partly about learning to be frugal, but also about being part of a loving, extended family and network of friends. But not everyone is fortunate to have that sort of caring support network. My older brother David currently runs a food bank at his church in Surrey, which has been fairly stressful for him over the last year, as you can imagine. Not only did the number of people requiring food parcels quadruple, but half his volunteers were isolating because they're mainly retired folk. Even here in the UK, people struggle to feed themselves and their families as a result of poverty. We all know about Marcus Rashford and his campaign for getting free meals for kids during the school holidays. There are people, even here in Desborough and round about, who live in poverty and as a consequence go hungry, having to choose between eating and heating, for example. It's hard to imagine what it must be like in countries with less sophisticated economies, especially when there's a drought and harvests are destroyed. I spoke in a recent Thought for the Day about my work with CAP, Christians Against Poverty. And I quoted the words from the prophet Isaiah, who said in chapter 58 verse 10 that if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness. It's part of a passage in which people are criticised for the way they obey all the rules and the rituals, everything required of them, but only by doing the bare minimum and not really putting their heart into it. This even includes regular fasting. But through the prophet, God says in again, chapter 58, verse 5, is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed, or for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And in verse 6 he goes on, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. We're Christians if we are disciples of Jesus Christ, which means more than just going to church on Sunday or following services online. Being a disciple of Christ means striving to be like him. And he in turn was constantly telling his disciples to follow the teaching of the prophets. In Matthew 7 he says, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. In Matthew 22, a very famous passage, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. In other words, if you want to know how to properly obey those two great commandments, you need to study the prophets in order to understand exactly what's required, to get the detail. So being a disciple of Christ and loving your neighbour includes what it says in the prophets. And it includes that quote from Isaiah about sharing your food with the hungry. When I thought about what it means for me to be a disciple of Christ, I found it quite challenging. But in opening myself to God, I found that he opened opportunities for me, and the work I'm doing in CAP is part of that. Now, I don't know which story will be chosen for this evening's Lent course, but all the stories in this week's section of the book are about the hungry. And they challenge us to think about what we're doing to the environment and the effect that might have. What becomes clear from these stories is that the actions of humankind are gradually eating away at the very planet that God has given us and which sustains us. Now, people a lot cleverer than me are constantly finding new ways to improve our crops and generally find ways to get more food for us. And it's right to do that as long as it doesn't do anything to damage our planet elsewhere. But don't let's forget that the world is currently organised in a way that allows the few to consume more than they need and to throw away what they don't need, while others go hungry. There should be no need to grow more food, because there is already more than enough for everyone in the world, every single person in the world, to have an abundance, if only we would learn to share. This Lent, I urge you to think about what you might do to help the hungry or the oppressed, or to loose the chains of injustice. Amen.